The dust of the NFL draft has now settled, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have a new group of rookies, but some of those rookies are from one location, oddly enough, as they're from the University of Maryland. And it actually created kind of the most interesting point of the Steelers draft. And you guys can go back to my past shows where I talked a lot about that running back decision for the Steelers and whether or not they were going to go out and try to grab Leonard Fournette and that whole discussion and my thoughts there. And they end up not doing that, and they end up drafting a running back, Anthony McFarland, out of the University of Maryland. And they also try to kind of fill another need that they basically replaced off a trade last year, but still need some depth there with another player out of the University of Maryland. So there's some Terps are now around Pittsburgh and around the Steeler parts. So that's kind of interesting. So I figured I would bring on somebody who's covered Maryland football to kind of discuss things and get you guys the nitty-gritty and the real analysis of these players, since there's maybe some things that need dispelled and maybe his thoughts on what the Steelers should or should not have done. Since mine have been well out there, I'm still a guy who thought the Steelers should have brought in Fournette if they really are in win-now mode. This is another edition of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, SteelersNow.com. I am your host, Mike Asti, and for this edition of the show, I'm going to be joined by Adam Zielonka, who is a sports reporter for the Washington Times down there in the DMV, and he, of course, a part of his gig, and that encompasses many other things there, especially what you have going on there in the DMV, the whole sports scene, but then also beyond that for him, but mainly covering Maryland and Maryland football included in that. So, Adam, first off, thanks for joining me. Glad we got the Zoom kinks here out. I think I finally dispelled my your current coworker and a former colleague and one of my best friends issue, actually, that I will tell him after the show.
Yeah.
And that I actually continue to be a supporter of the Zoom platform for all the shows we've done on Pittsburgh Sports Live. So George Gerbo is incorrect, and I'm very happy about that. So thanks for joining me. Glad to have you aboard here. And I guess we'll get into this with Anthony McFarland ends up being the Steelers' selection in the fourth round. They take a running back. They finally fill that need that many discussed they needed to deal with, and many thought Dobson and several others. They didn't do that. They went for Claypool and went for a whole other position, which is a conversation for another day. But there were some rumors around McFarland in terms of almost making it odd the Steelers would have went in that direction if they were correct, because the Steelers were potentially in rumors for being interested in Leonard Fournette, who would be a veteran running back they could pair with James Conner and add to the room, especially being win-now mode. Many who didn't want him around went to the injury history and even the character concerns. But then there were some reports that those same issues were surrounding Anthony McFarland, which made it kind of odd they would shy away from a veteran for a rookie with everything Kevin Colbert's saying about wanting to win right now. So I kind of want to get your thoughts before we get to the analysis of the player. In terms of the rumors that there are character issues with Anthony McFarland, where did that come from? Any validity to that? I know a scout brought that up, but others have kind of dispelled that since the draft.
Sure. To start off with this idea of him having character concerns, that from my limited exposure to the Maryland football team and to McFarland, that wasn't really something I was ever privy to personally.
Okay.
Now, scouts who have gotten deeper into maybe McFarland's, I don't know, family or personal life or whatever, because you have to interview these guys and get to know them pretty closely. Certain scouts certainly would have their own takeaways from those interviews. And I don't know particularly to what they might be referring when they say that. And I guess that the point there would be, if you're talking about a comparison to Leonard Fournette having an injury history and Leonard Fournette having character issues pegged on him as well, I think that the difference is just the numerical difference, the monetary difference between trading for somebody like Fournette who'd want to get paid versus drafting a rookie who you can try out for a few years on a rookie deal, of mid-round draft pick who if things don't work out, it was just a fourth-round pick. You kind of wash your hands of it after a few years if things don't work out for McFarland. I think if you have to compare rumored character concerns with his injury history, all my concerns would be just in the injury history column. He was injured his senior year of high school pretty badly and had to redshirt his freshman year at Maryland, even though he did get that scholarship to Maryland coming out of DeMatha High School out here. in the area in Hyattsville. And then he had a high ankle sprain that sort of limited him in his 2019 campaign. So there's not a whole ton of it's not like you've got reels and reels of tape on him, because he basically had a season and a half of college and hasn't played a whole ton of football necessarily in the last, 4 years because of those injuries. That would be one concern. I guess I am a little surprised he went in the 4th round as opposed to maybe the 5th, early 6th. Some draft profiles I've read of him and some mock drafts kind of saw him more as maybe a 6th round pick. So maybe the Steelers did go a little high for him, but they clearly liked something that they saw out of him. And at most, I mean, if his potential is that he can be a good change of pace back for what you have there in James Conner, Snell, and Jalen Samuels, although maybe he projects a little bit to be sort of like Samuels in the way he runs. He's definitely different than Conner. And if he can give you a couple carries a game to spell Conner in the second half, he has that potential to break one free.
Yeah, and I think the idea is to get somebody else there that maybe is a complement to James Conner because of his injury history and the fact that he hasn't been able to play a full season, and having somebody who's a bit of a change of pace is a good thing. And as we touched on our site, there definitely are a lot of positives to Anthony McFarland in terms of his burst potential and the fact that he does have that big play option, and that is a possibility with him. And really, the character concerns have only, from what I've learned, have only been brought up by a few scouts, and they talked about his relationship with coaches. That's kind of where they were going, his relationship with coaches. So that's something you haven't heard. Now, the interesting thing about that is, which I think maybe makes that not an issue, there's a common thread to a coach he dealt with to now the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Matt Canada, who's now the quarterback's coach, and he dealt with as an offensive coordinator. So I imagine they got along. I didn't cover Maryland. I'm assuming there was no issues between anything you heard from Canada saying about him.
And that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I hadn't even really considered Canada being in Pittsburgh now. Canada was in College Park in 2018, took over for DJ Durkin. So not only was he the offensive coordinator, but he was the head honcho for that whole 2018 season, which happened to be Anthony McFarland's first year getting to play. Second year in the program, but first season on the field. So if there was some issue between him and Canada, then Canada wouldn't have probably wanted him in the 4th round.
I would assume that, and obviously Matt Canada's not going to get final say, so he's not he's not a head coach with the team, but still, I would imagine that would have got brought up in the room or virtual room if there was some issues that he would have had and some red flag out there. So putting maybe the character concerns to bed, the injury history does exist, but say he's healthy. He's there. Leonard Fournette's not there, so we're living in the here and now in the reality. Say Anthony McFarland is able to stay healthy and he can contribute to the Pittsburgh Steelers. What should Steeler fans expect out of him, especially in a crowded running back room, but a room that's needed? All of those backs seemingly are needed for a struggling running back group of a year ago. So it seems like he's a positive addition, but what can Steeler fans expect out of Anthony McFarland who maybe aren't familiar with Maryland football?
Sure. I would say hope is different than expect, but I think that there's a hope that he can actually, I'll tell you from an optimistic perspective, that if he can do some semblance of what he was able to do on the field in various points of 2019, but particularly 2018 when he had a very terrific redshirt freshman season there.
Right.
There was his honestly his best college game was against Ohio State as a redshirt freshman. And we all know the kind of defensive output that the Buckeyes have had in recent years.
Right.
Laden with future NFL players. He ran for 298 yards in the first 6 minutes of that game. It was on home turf at the end of that season. Dwayne Haskins in Maryland, of course, now he's a Redskin, but I digress. At the first 6 minutes of that game, he had touchdown runs of 82 and 75 yards against this defense. He ends up going for 298 on the game. And Maryland was very competitive against what was, I think, the 10th ranked team in the country at that point of the season. Right. And it was largely McFarland. It's not like Maryland's had terrific quarterbacks in the last several seasons. I think for people who don't know, in Pittsburgh, Maryland's been a run-heavy team. And in fact, when you say Pittsburgh kind of has a crowded running back room at the moment, when you add McFarland to Connor, Snell, and Samuels, Maryland themselves have had recruited a ton of 4-star running backs, types like McFarland, Tayon Fleet-Davis, Jake Funk, who's a different kind of runner, more of like a power back who is just the elder statesman in the room. and I'm already forget Javon Leake. So this was a very, very talented core in Maryland. McFarland, though, was the shining. He was the keystone. He was the centerpiece of that rushing attack. He was not as effective again in 2019, partly due to injury. But the way he could burst, like you mentioned his burst before, I love his burst. It's possibly one of the best things about his tool belt, his skill set. Is he a perfect runner? No, obviously, if he were, he would be drafted much higher. He would be the type of Travis Etienne prospect that we might be looking at next season out in next year's college class. There are nice things that you can expect. I don't think you would expect McFarland to suddenly win the job from Connor in any universe, or even immediately establish himself as the number 2 right away. I think that you need to look at him as a very nice change of pace option, maybe somebody who runs out of the backfield on a third down play, a play action perhaps, where he could run the wheel route and be an option for Roethlisberger in the passing game. I don't think he was used often on kick returns in Maryland, but I think he could if you wanted to give him try. You know how
the Steelers need help special teams wise. Yeah, the Steelers. Yeah. That was a weakness last year. They didn't really establish a returner most of that season. So I don't know if that could be a possibility. They definitely need help there.
And this is not a standard off season because of the pandemic, but in any, you go back in any July, early August, 6 guys, no matter what team it is, unless they have Dante Hall or Devin Hester back there, 6 guys are returning punts or at least fielding punts and doing little drills on that nature, no matter what the team. So I could see them trying him out there. That's maybe me speculating a little bit, but I think that the skill set would fit because he's great in open space. And if you give him a little space, he's going to accelerate.
Okay, now the only thing, though, and again, Mike Asti here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now talking with Adam Zielonka, sports reporter for the Washington Times, and I'm proud of myself for pronouncing your name correctly, by the way. If I didn't ask you beforehand, I never would have been able to do it. I would have butchered it, but it's one of those things. It doesn't sound like it looks. So, but we both have the thing in common where our last name gets mispronounced and butchered all the time.
Okay, yeah. When I heard you say Asti, I was like, I would have assumed Asti or.
I get both of those, and my family throws up both of those. But Asti works because it's like the champagne. Think of it that way. Mm-hmm. Think of the champagne in Italy. But it does appear, though, for Steeler fans who maybe we're trying to get optimistic or glass half full with this situation, because we also get the reports now the Jaguars are going to keep Leonard Fournette, which kind of leans me in the direction that maybe that supports the Steelers maybe should have pulled the trigger on it even more so, because there was not a big market for him. They probably could have got him for this exact 4th-round pick, if not even lower. He's certainly underachieved a little bit in his NFL career and has character issues. I mean, he literally punched somebody in the face on national TV in the past. So that's not up in the air. He does have character issues. But the thinking was that if Connor goes down or Connor can't complete an entire year because he's not been able to yet, then maybe Fournette could, as a former 1,000-yard rusher, come in there and give you at least close to number 1 running back stuff. Mm-hmm. Sounds like what you're saying, though. They didn't do that. They went with the rookie. They didn't want to throw the dice on somebody with character issues who's a veteran, that if Connor goes down, there's still not a chance for number 1 running back on this team. McFarland would really be best suited as having somebody there. So if Connor gets hurt, they're kind of in the same situation they were a year ago.
Yeah, and I don't want to get everybody's hopes completely dashed. I mean, there are the situations like you see with Phillip Lindsay in Denver, who went undrafted and pretty soon became the Broncos' best running back in the room. This probably doesn't really equate exactly like that. It's not unheard of, but I think if Connor goes down, of course, McFarland would see more carries, but I think Snell and Samuels would probably be the guys from there. And I'm not a Steelers fan. I don't follow the team that closely, but I assume that's kind of the hierarchy.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, Snell got a little bit of the load last year without Connor. Samuels got in there towards the end of the season and showed he was worth a little bit. I'd imagine that Samuels and McFarland potentially could fight out for that opportunity, depending on how McFarland does early on in the year. And the other connection too that I thought of, separate from Matt Canada, that also may dispel character issues, is Mike Tomlin's son played for Maryland. It was a teammate of McFarland. So again, they would have had plenty of people to let them know. And I don't know. Maybe that would have been an issue in terms of do you defend your boy or do you tell your dad what's really going on? I don't know what he would have done there if he was asked, but we'll never know.
Right.
But we'll see. But the weirdest thing about the Steelers is the Anthony McFarland, and it kind of is why I wanted to have you on the show here and wanted to get somebody that's covered Maryland, because Anthony McFarland ends up not being the only former Terp that the Steelers end up drafting, which is odd because, as you said, Maryland is not exactly known as this powerhouse football program churning NFL draft picks. But that's the case for the Steelers here this year in what was an odd virtual draft. They also bring out Antoine Brooks. They draft him in the 6th round, a safety out of Maryland, and it does fill a need position for the Steelers. They've kind of needed to fill that role, need a safety for a couple years now. Obviously, bringing Minkah Fitzpatrick off the trade, it ends up being the de facto first round number 1 tops pick this past year, and that's going to be the stud. But what do you know about Antoine Brooks? What have you seen from Antoine Brooks for Steelers fans also not as familiar with him, that if he maybe could make this team, if he could bring something to the table, if he does make this team, and what his college career kind of was like?
Right. Yeah. Well, Brooks, unlike McFarland, Brooks went through his senior season. He's been in the college game for that many years now. Not an early guy like with McFarland. We're talking about a redshirt sophomore, had basically 17 college games. Brooks is the opposite of that. Brooks is, and if you're looking for somebody for depth in the secondary, and what team doesn't want some depth in the secondary, you could do worse than spending a mid-round pick on Antoine Brooks. He's built really well. He's considered an alpha personality. To be honest with you, I didn't spend as much time like watching his tape or his performance during the season. I could tell you more offhand about, Anthony McFarland and his stats as plays. With Brooks, though, he could be a special team contributor. When you're talking about with safety being addressed by Minkah Fitzpatrick, excellent safety, obviously one of the best that there is in the NFL at the moment. If Fitzpatrick were to go down, Brooks probably would have a shot to be somebody to fill in that spot. You got to see what happens with the training camp, and that's going to be part of the thing. With all NFL teams, we don't know what camp's going to look like. We don't know for the rookies coming in how quickly they're going to learn a playbook, especially if you're not, maybe interacting with the coaching staff in person on a daily basis. Who knows with regards to that? And it's probably going to be nice for Brooks and McFarland to be going to the same team together, so they're not totally fish out of water. They've at least got somebody where they were teammates together, you assume, on a good relationship, and that might benefit them both in a little way.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't even know if there's going to be a training camp, but I guess that's kind of how I run to round things out, especially with McFarland, who you do know a lot about and have been around. If there's not a training camp, or if there's a condensed training camp, or it's not like normal, do you expect him to be somebody that can still relatively early kind of immerse himself to the team and the culture in terms of as a professional, in terms of even fitting into the team and learning an NFL playbook and knowing the schemes? Or will that greatly affect him negatively? Because it wouldn't be a criticism necessarily. That may very well. I mean, I had a former NFL player on my show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about how these draft picks, especially the later end draft picks, if there's not a full training camp, even if it's a condensed training camp where they don't have rookie camp, that could be a death nail to some of these guys' careers, because they heavily need it, especially when you're going to a new team. And that's not even speaking to veterans and free agents going to new teams in the NFL. But what kind of impact may that have on Anthony McFarland in particular if there's a little bit of a condensed training camp?
Oh, on McFarland in particular? Let me see. I think, considering the position he plays, it's not like he's going to have to learn some whole new fancy route tree. It does probably depend in part on just every player, regardless of position, going from college to the NFL or even between NFL teams, has to pick up some new verbiage, right? You have to learn what this meant, what I used to know it as. It's the same play maybe, but it's got a new title because Coach Tomlin is the one who has it in the playbook, so he's got his own words. So there's going to be that, and that probably affects people regardless of their styles or their capabilities. Maybe I'd be a little more worried about Brooks fitting in, because, I mean, you would especially being in the backfield, the defensive backfield, you have to kind of learn not only what you got to be protecting in the safety end and in the back end, but probably what's going on in front of you too. That means you really have to kind of know a lot about the defense. You need to know in all three levels what's going on in front of you and what you have to protect back in the backside. Coverage shells still probably look like coverage shells to NFL players, and this is the part where I say I didn't play organized football, and I don't claim to be any sort of expert in how playbooks look.
Right. Well, neither
but coverage
did I,
shells probably should translate at least. It's going to be a question not only for Brooks and McFarland, but for many rookies. I guess I don't mean to repeat myself, but for many rookies coming in,
right.
how much time they're going to get, what the staff is going to do to help rookies and newcomers to the team, undrafted free agents, what have you, in order to learn that playbook and get acclimated. I know from what I know of the Steelers culture basically comes from the fallout of the drama from Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell before him not wanting to play there. And the more time went by with Antonio Brown last year, of course, the more Mike Tomlin looks like not just a hero, but potentially a saint for living with him. And people said a Nobel Peace Prize nominee.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a joke about that. Yeah, and as somebody who covered Antonio Brown and covered that mess, and then now can ask George some stories I've told him about. Yeah, so that we all should have got a share of a Nobel Peace Prize. I feel like, yeah.
Right. So I just bring that up to say that it would be worse if the Steelers had a new coach, a first-year coach, or what those people would have to go through. First-year coach doesn't get a normal environment, and even then, Ron Rivera and the Redskins down here in Washington, where I'm covering, I'm not so concerned about Ron Rivera because he seems like, even despite the Panthers' struggles, Rivera is one of the stronger coaches in the NFL.
He's a veteran coach. Yeah.
Versus, a coordinator, I can't think of one, Kevin Stefanski with the Browns, first coaching job, and you don't get the normal environment and setting. That would be difficult. I feel like the Steelers at least have an advantage that Tomlin is a mainstay and a longtime coach who's got a culture, and it's either you buy in or you're not really sticking around.
Yeah, and that could also be very well what went on, as we never know really into that war room, but I'm sure the Steelers culture is more weary of anybody with any character concerns. And as much as it makes sense to me that if you're going to keep telling the media in these Zoom calls, you're in win now mode and you have a veteran back and he could fill in for Connor and they'd be a great tandem in Leonard Fournette. Maybe you watch some throwback college games that they're churning on the national stations these days. You see a little incident, and then you hear some reports from other coaches, and you think, I don't know if I really want to go down that road right now based on where the road that they just were on. So that very well could be the case, and maybe they dispelled any of the character issues with Anthony McFarland. And I do think it's not anything to underrate in terms of Matt Canada being with the Steelers. When you have a guy – like even Antoine Brooks playing defense, not necessarily Matt Canada's specialty, but they know each other, and that's a late-round pick from not a football hotbed of a school. That relationship could at least help acclimating him into becoming a pro, and then Anthony McFarland certainly will be involved in the offensive game plan. He might be able to be a voice in Tomlin's ear saying, hey, maybe if you're not sure, this guy vouched for him, potentially could vouch for him if they have a condensed training camp and can't get the full effect. So we'll see. But, Adam, definitely appreciate the time for sure. I do think there were a lot of Steelers fans maybe not fully aware of these two players and what they can bring to the table, positive or negative, because probably not Maryland football watchers in terms of most Steeler fans. And they're not getting tons of national recognition for that Maryland program either. So definitely happy to have you aboard. And, good luck over there in D.C. Stay safe, and tell George I said hi if you see him before me next.
Thanks, Mike. I will. Glad to be on. Good luck. Take care. And, I'll talk to George real soon for you.
All right, absolutely. That was Adam Zielonka, sports reporter with the Washington Times there. And again, he was able to kind of dispel a lot of the rumors, but talk a lot about what Anthony McFarland and even Antoine Brooks can bring to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it was odd, the Steelers drafting two guys out of the University of Maryland. That's not exactly Oklahoma, Texas, Ohio State, Miami, the USC. It's not historically a football hotbed in terms of churning NFL draft picks. But as much as I still, and maybe you guys don't want to hear me keep harping on this, and I've already tweeted again about this, so maybe this will be the end because I'm sure I'm annoying some right now. But either way, I got to stick true to what I believe in. I again, to this point, I still would have pulled the trigger on the 4th-round draft pick. Certainly would have done it if it could have been a 6th-round draft pick, which then wouldn't have interrupted McFarland, and maybe you draft somebody else there, but maybe you do it as a security blanket regardless. Who knows for the future? If you're in win-now mode, as Kevin Colbert continuously says, if you're in win-now mode and you believe you're trying to win now with Ben Roethlisberger, you want to win with Ben Roethlisberger, not after Ben Roethlisberger, say, unlike what the Packers are doing there with Aaron Rodgers, and Kevin Colbert keeps on saying that, he keeps on repeating himself there, then you go ahead and pull the trigger. It's a 4th-round draft pick. You bring in Leonard Fournette. He's a veteran. He's had a 1,000-yard season before. Yes, he's a little bit underachieved in his NFL career after being so highly touted coming into the league. And yes, James Conner has arguably overachieved as somebody who was a 3rd-round draft pick, was not as touted, had an injury history, had the great story of overcoming cancer. But in terms of being a great college back, he was. But many didn't think that would translate to the National Football League. Many didn't. Many thought maybe him and Bell would be a great pairing, and that didn't actually end up being able to work out for the drama with Le'Veon Bell and his contract. And James Conner surprised me. I lost some bets with a few colleagues there in terms of what he did his rookie season, and it would have been 1,000 yards if he didn't get hurt. Then we see last year, another solid season, but nothing too phenomenal. He gets hurt. He misses even more games, and he's fumbled away the football. He's had those weaknesses that have cost the Steelers games. So that's a concern with James Conner. And for me, again, I don't believe James Conner can be the guy. Not that you need it in the NFL to win, but I don't believe James Conner can be the guy, can be an elite back. That's just not going to happen. He's not somebody that I would ever pay tons of money to. Maybe he'll give hometown discounts to stay in Pittsburgh. But you don't need an elite back to win. That's certainly a fact. That's not even up for debate. It's been proven the last several years. The Eagles won a championship with a running back tandem. The Rams went to a Super Bowl after Todd Gurley got hurt in the postseason, and C.J. Anderson rolled off his couch and led him to the NFC crown. We've seen the Patriots do that time and time again, go to Super Bowls and win championships with a tandem of running backs. The Steelers had a tandem of running backs really for a time, even when they were winning, despite Bell being an elite back and carrying most of that load. Garrett Blount was there, and that was great. That was really the best running year kind of in tandem for the Steelers in a while. So that's the ideal. Having a running back tandem is the ideal. And I was never advocating getting rid of James Conner right now. I don't think he's a feature guy. I wouldn't give him tons of money, but I wasn't getting rid of him right now. This is win now mode. They want to win right now. So I was keeping James Conner, hoping he can stay healthy, but bringing in Leonard Fournette as more of that security blanket if he doesn't. And Adam kind of made this clear and kind of supported what I was saying even more, that as much as Anthony McFarland can give you that burst, can be a young back maybe for the future of this team, maybe compete with Benny Snell to be the future of this team, regardless of James Conner or maybe in addition to James Conner, that's not going to probably help next year. And next year, you think you can win a championship with Ben Roethlisberger back as a starter. You clearly didn't make the playoffs last year due to quarterback play. You would have made it with the new NFL format. So now the NFL format is there. They have another playoff team that's available. And Ben Roethlisberger is going to be back as your starter. And yes, he's older, but if he even plays anything close to what he did 2 or 3 years ago, and maybe less yards, less TDs, but maybe more efficient and less mistakes, all of those things I thought actually was going to happen last year without AB, oddly, then, again, you're a team that certainly can win. It'll be a tight division, but they're certainly a team that can win now, and they believe that, especially with how great that defense was last year. And that, again, goes to maybe Antoine Brooks adding some depth to that position. That secondary was the weakness 2 years ago. But overall, they don't even really need him. That defense is so deep and so good at the top on down with T.J. Watt and company. So this team can win, certainly can. It'll come down the divisional games. And I would have wanted to have Leonard Fournette, but if Conner goes down, then you have Fournette. If Fournette goes down, you have Conner. And yes, you'd rather have the two of them together, but they can both work and serve at least as a number one running back for several weeks. You don't need an elite back to win, but the Steelers' running game was so, I guess, inefficient most of last season that you need a tandem. And I think the Steelers can't just give it to Conner and Snell. I'd rather have Conner and Fournette than Conner and Snell. I'd rather have Conner and Fournette than Conner and McFarland, or Conner, McFarland, and Snell. So you're not building for the future. You're not rebuilding. You're winning now. That would have made sense to me then. 4th-round draft pick for Leonard Fournette. Doesn't seem like that would have been too high of a price tag, but maybe the character concerns with him had them shy away, where the character issues with Anthony McFarland maybe were a little bit overblown. Maybe somebody bitter, somebody brought something up. Maybe blown up more than it actually should have been. That's kind of where Adam went. That's kind of what I've learned as well. So that's kind of what it seems. And regardless, Matt Canada and Tomlin's son, I don't think they all would have vouched for a guy if there really were character concerns. But I want to once again thank Anthony McFarland, Adam Zielonka, talking about Anthony McFarland, as well as Antoine Brooks, 2 players out of the University of Maryland. So, again, not a football hotbed. Thought maybe you guys needed a little bit of a refresher what those 2 can do and what they can bring to the table if they both make the Steelers team. And I'd imagine McFarland at least will in that crowded running back room, but we will see. Again, Adam Zielonka, sports reporter for the Washington Times. This has been, of course, another Radio Gold edition here, or Video Gold edition. I haven't said that actual phrase in a while. I figured I'd bring it back here. Of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, Steelers Now. Want to remind you guys to hit us up on social media, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Twitter at PGH Sports Live, as well as on Facebook, Pittsburgh Sports Live, at PGH Steelers Now on Twitter, and Steelers Now over there on Facebook as well. You can find me at Mike Asti 11 on Twitter, where you can send all your hate and disagreement of this. Just no death threats. Got those before. Don't need any more of those in the DMs. And, of course, make sure bottom of the screen, bottom of this video, hit the subscribe button. It'll make it easier for us to get this content to you and keep the lights on and help pay the bills even if we're here at home studios, and help those sponsors keep on moving here at the network. So, again, Steelers got some Maryland studs. We'll see what that does. But, again, I'm still pretty confident that I would have pulled the trigger on Leonard Fournette. McFarland could be good. I could be wrong. He certainly could burst. Those couple bursts will have people tweeting me and tell me how wrong I was. But I would have pulled the trigger on Leonard Fournette because, of course, you're in win-now mode, aren't you, Kevin Colbert?